some sounds follow you home, echoing in your mind long after you've escaped the place that made them. Maya learned this the hard way. Maya had always been drawn to abandoned places, the way nature slowly reclaimed what humans had built, the stories that empty rooms seemed to whisper. So when her friends, Jake and Chloe, suggested exploring the old Ridgemont High School, she jumped at the chance. The building had been closed for nearly 15 years after a budget crisis forced the district to consolidate. Urban exploration forums were buzzing about its untouched classrooms and eerie hallways. He'd done his research. As always, we go in through the back entrance. The lock's been broken for years. They met at midnight on a moonless October night, the kind where shadows seemed to breathe. The school loomed against the starless sky like a sleeping giant, its broken windows resembling hollow eye sockets. Maya felt that familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with unease as they approached the chain-link fence surrounding the property. "Security hasn't patrolled here in months," Jake whispered, consulting his phone. Most abandoned buildings felt empty, hollowed out. This place felt ... occupied. Jake pushed it open with a prolonged creak that seemed to announce their arrival to whatever waited inside. The classrooms were exactly what Maya had expected: overturned desks, water damage, layers of dust coating everything. But as they moved deeper into the building, something began to feel off. Maya noticed it first in the main corridor, where the floor showed faint but distinct patterns, as if someone had been sweeping regularly. The smell hit them immediately: musty ear, mildew, and something else Maya couldn't quite identify as something clean and chemical that seemed out of place. The trio slipped through a gap in the fence and made their way around the building. Their flashlight beams danced across graffiti-covered walls and weeds that had pushed through cracks in the concrete. The beam illuminated subtle streaks in the dust, too uniform to be natural. Maya's heart pounded with excitement. This was exactly the kind of authentic decay that made for great photos. The janitor's office was immaculate, not just cleaned, perfectly maintained. This building's been empty for 15 years. The desk was organized, papers stacked neatly despite being years old. The room felt lived in, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Dates were current, recent. Some were marked as completed in fresh handwriting. A coffee mug sat on the desk, still bearing a faint brown ring. A uniform hung on a hook behind the door, navy blue coveralls with Herald embroidered on the chest pocket. Swish, step, swish, step. The unmistakable sound of someone sweeping, moving with practiced efficiency through the darkened halls. Its cleaning supplies lined the shelves, their labels bright and new. A calendar on the wall showed the current month and year, with several dates circled in red ink. The back door hung slightly ajar, its metal frame warped by years of weather. Their footsteps echoed as they entered what had once been a bustling hallway. Light chased the janitor through the hallway like a wave, illuminating empty corridor after empty corridor in his wake. The sweeping was no longer coming from below, was coming from their level. It's from the opposite end of the hallway they needed to traverse to reach the door. Some windows were cleaner than others, as if someone had been washing them sporadically. Whatever was making that sound was moving toward them with purpose, and there was nowhere to go but through the main hall directly toward it. Even the lights stopped their forward progression, leaving half the hallway illuminated and the other half in darkness. They stood at the threshold between light and shadow, afraid to move in either direction. The sound was distant, but it was getting closer, as if whoever was speaking had moved through the building faster than should have been possible. And that chemical smell was stronger now, clearly some kind of industrial cleaner. Lockers lined the walls, some hanging open like gaping mouths, their contents long since removed or rotted away. Classroom doors stood closed, their small windows dark and impenetrable. And closer down a hallway that exists only in her memory. As they drove away, Maya looked back at the building and saw every single light burning bright against the darkness, as if someone had flipped every switch in the place. They ran toward the back exit, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the empty hallways. Behind them, the lights continued their inexorable march, and the voice called out again, patient but firm. "This place gives me the creeps," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their breathing. "That's the point," Maya replied, though she had to admit the atmosphere was more oppressive than she'd expected. They explored systematically, documenting each room with their cameras. The hallways were too clean. It's not completely clean. There was still debris and the occasional puddle from roof leaks, but cleaner than they should have been. "Okay, look at this," she called to the others, pointing her flashlight at the ground. Jake knelt down for a closer look. Weird wind patterns, maybe, but Maya wasn't convinced. The marks looked deliberate, methodical. They looked like someone had been maintaining these floors. They continued their exploration, and the evidence mounted. Light fixtures that should have been coated in cobwebs were merely dusty. It was Chloe who found the janitor's office. "Guys, you need to see this," she called from a doorway near the main stairwell. Maya and Jake hurried over, and what they saw made them all fall silent. "This is impossible," Jake breathed. Maya stepped inside, her skin prickling with unease. "We need to leave," Chloe said, backing toward the hallway. "Okay, this is someone's space. We're trespassing." But Maya was drawn to a bulletin board covered in maintenance schedules and work orders. That's when they heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. The three friends froze, their hearts hammering in unison. "Basement," Jake whispered. "It's coming from the basement." Maya felt ice in her veins. The sweeping continued, steady and methodical, accompanied by the soft squeak of Will's janitor's cart being pushed along the corridor below them. "We're leaving now." Chloe's voice was tight with panic. But as they turned toward the exit, the sound changed direction. The fluorescent lights above them flickered once, twice, then hummed to life in a stuttering sequence that followed the sound of the approaching footsteps. Maya watched in horrified fascination as the lights grew closer. "The windows," Jake hissed, pointing to a classroom. "We can break out through." The sweeping stopped. "Okay." The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound had been. "Okay." Then they heard a voice, gravelly and tired, calling out from the darkness ahead of them. "School's closed. Kids, time to go home." Maya's blood turned to ice water. The voice was closer than the sweeping had been, much closer. Without another word, all three of them bolted. "I said, school's closed." They burst through the back door and didn't stop running until they de-cleared the fence and reached Jake's car. Maya never did urban exploration again after that night. But sometimes, late at night when she's trying to fall asleep, she still hears that rhythmic sweeping. Getting closer, and she wonders if Harold is still there, still maintaining his building, still making sure the school stays clean for students who will never return. Some names are never meant to be erased. Chloe learned this the hard way when she found hers written in fresh chalk on a blackboard that should have been covered in 15 years of dust. Chloe had always been the type to back down from a dare. Now it stood like a monument to forgotten childhoods. Its windows boarded up and parking lot cracked with weeds pushing through the asphalt. "We can just say you did it." The chain link fence had been cut long ago by other urban explorers. "I'll be fine. It's just one night," leaving the gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. In high school, when her friends challenged her to sneak out or try something risky, she'd find an excuse. But at 28, standing in the parking lot of her abandoned middle school with her three closest friends, something felt different. It was too quiet. Even abandoned buildings usually had sound-settling wood, scurrying mice, wind through broken windows. The principal's office door stood ajar, and she pushed it open with one finger. Principal Hendricks had been a stern but fair woman, and Chloe had only been sent here once for talking during assembly. Once for not turning in a science project. This place felt muffled, as if sound itself was being absorbed by the walls. But when she looked again, her name was still there. The chalk so fresh, it hadn't even begun to fade. Maybe it was the wine from dinner, or maybe it was tired of being called the responsible one. Some of it came away on her fingertip, proving it was real, proving it was fresh. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair that clattered loudly in the silence. Walking through the halls now, she could almost hear the echo of slamming lockers, teenage laughter, and the shuffle of hundreds of feet. But deep down, she knew better. Then the light hit the blackboard on the far wall, and Chloe's blood turned to ice. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Chloe found herself following the sound. She had to know. Her footsteps sounded unnaturally loud on the cracked linoleum. It was the sound of a class in session, papers rustling, pencils moving across paper, the occasional cough or shifting in seats. But there were no voices, no teachers speaking. It's just the phantom sounds of students working in complete silence. She sprinted through the halls, her lantern beam bouncing wildly, creating dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. Behind her, she could hear the sound of classroom doors opening, of footsteps in the hallways, of a school coming to life with students who should have graduated years ago. The building looked exactly as it had before, boarded up, abandoned, forgotten. Tight, the door was closed, but light seeped out from underneath, not electric light, but the soft, warm glow of candles. And their third name from the top was Chloe Martinez, with today's date written beside it in neat, precise handwriting. And she wonders if some debts can never be paid, if some names can never be erased, and if she'll always be expected to serve that detention she never showed up for all those years ago. The air smelled like old textbooks and that particular scent of childhood paste and erasers and fear. But there was something else, something that made Chloe's mouth go dry. But when Marcus dared her to spend the night alone inside Riverside Middle School, she surprised everyone, including herself, by saying yes. The writing was in Principal Hendrick's distinctive handwriting. She'd seen it on enough reprimand slips to recognize it anywhere. But that was impossible. Principal Hendricks had died in a car accident 8 years ago. The building had been closed for 15 years, ever since the district built a newer facility across town. "You sure about this, Chloe?" Sarah asked, holding the bolt cutters they'd used on the padlock securing the main entrance. She tried to explain what happened, but the words sounded crazy, even to her own ears. But Chloe shook her head, surprised by her own determination. The heavy metal doors groaned as they swung open, releasing a musty breath of stale air that made Chloe's nose wrinkle. Her friends helped her carry in a sleeping bag a few bottles of water and a powerful lead lantern. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating familiar hallways that now felt foreign and wrong. "Text us every hour," Marcus said, though they all knew cell service was spotty out here. "We'll be back at sunrise." And then they were gone, leaving Chloe alone with her memories and the oppressive silence of the empty school. She'd attended Riverside from 6th through 8th grade, some of the most awkward, painful years of her life. The building felt smaller than she remembered, the way childhood places always do. But there was something else, something that made her skin prickle with unease. Chloe made her way to the main office, thinking it would be a good central location to set up camp. She swept her lantern across the room, taking in the dust-covered desk, the empty filing cabinets, the motivational posters curling at the edges. There, in fresh white chalk that seemed to glow in the lead beam, was a detention list. The lantern trembled in her grip. She blinked hard, certain she was seeing things. She approached the board slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Chloe reached out with a trembling finger and touched the chalk. That's when she heard it. The sound of chalk on blackboard, the distinctive squeak and scratch that every student knew by heart. It was coming from somewhere else in the building. Chloe grabbed her lantern and fled the office, her rational mind trying to convince her that it was just the building settling. Old pipes or wine through a broken window. The scratching continued, echoing through the empty halls. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the classrooms. Room 114. Mrs. Patterson's old English class. Chloe pressed her ear to the door. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a different sound that made her stomach drop. She pushed the door open. His classroom was empty, but every desk had paper on it, and fresh chalk equations covered the blackboard. On the teacher's desk sat a stack of detention slips, and the top one had her name on it. Chloe ran then, abandoning all pretense of bravery. She burst through the main entrance and didn't stop running until she reached her car. The next morning, her friends found her sleeping in her car in a 24-hour diner parking lot, 30 miles away. 2 weeks later, curiosity got the better of her, and she drove past the school during daylight hours. But there, spray painted in fresh white paint across the front entrance, was a message that made her blood run cold. Chloe Martinez, detention pending. She never drove past that school again, but sometimes, late at night, she still hears the sound of chalk on blackboard. Some photographs capture more than just memories. They capture the weight of souls who never got to leave. Nate had explored dozens of abandoned buildings, but Westfield High felt different the moment he stepped through its rusted doors. The school had been shuttered abruptly in May 1987, days after what locals still called the incident. Faded motivational posters hung askew on the walls, their cheerful slogans now mocking in the dim light. Reach for the stars, class of '87. One proclaimed, its corners curled and brown with age. No one talked about what exactly happened that prom night, but the building had sat empty for 37 years, slowly rotting from the inside out, claiming it was perfectly preserved from the 1980s, like a time capsule waiting to be discovered. What they hadn't mentioned was the smell of sickly sweet scent that seemed to cling to everything, growing stronger as he approached the double doors marked gymnasium. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the way the gym seemed to grow colder every minute he spent inside. Up close, he could see that what he'd initially taken for party streamers were actually crepe paper twisted into unnatural shapes, as if they'd been caught in some violent wind. 2 ornate chairs sat in the center, draped in deep red velvet that had somehow retained its rich color despite the decades. The chairs were beautiful, clearly expensive, the kind of thing a school would have rented for a special occasion. But as he got closer, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. These had to be the thrones for the prom king and queen. The banner, too, was wrong. The letters in A Night to Remember were slightly smeared, as if someone had touched them while the paint was still wet. The late afternoon sun filtered through grimy windows as Nate made his way down the main hallway, his footsteps echoing off cracked linoleum. The indentations were perfect. He could make out the shape of backs, the curve of legs, even the subtle impression of hands resting on the armrests. Most were exactly what he'd expected, typical prom photos from 1987. Groups of teenagers in tuxedos and puffy dresses posed awkwardly with corsages and boutonnieres. The gym looked vibrant and alive, decorated with fresh flowers and bright streamers. Everyone was smiling, but the impressions were too deep, pressed into the fabric as if by tremendous weight or tremendous time. In every group shot, there seemed to be extra space, as if the photographer had been expecting more people in the frame. And in several pictures, other students were looking off to the side, their expressions uncomfortable, even frightened. Climbing up the first few rows, he found it wedged between 2 seats, a disposable camera, the kind that was popular in the late 80s. He thought about the other pictures, about the extra space in the group shots, about the uncomfortable expressions on the other students' faces. The plastic was yellowed with age, but otherwise intact. The red velvet looked rich and new, the gold trim gleaming, but the chairs were empty completely, undeniably empty. No people, no shadows, nothing. He turned it over in his hands, noting the 27 exposures printed on the side. The film counter showed it had been used completely. He'd come here specifically for the gymnasium. Urban exploration forums had been buzzing about Westfield's gym. Its human-shaped depressions, as clear as if they'd been made by invisible bodies of immense weight. He turned around slowly, his flashlight beam sweeping across the empty basketball court. Sometimes, late at night, he swears he can see the impressions growing deeper. Nothing, but the feeling persisted. As if invisible eyes were watching him from the shadows, Nate pulled out his camera and began documenting the scene. The basketball hoops still had their nets, though they hung in tatters. The clerk, an elderly man with thick glasses, handed him the envelope with a strange expression. The scoreboard was frozen at 0-0, its digital display long since dead. The doors groaned as Nate pushed them open, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The gym was massive, with the bleachers stretching up on both sides and a basketball court that had seen better days. But what caught his attention immediately were the decorations still hanging from the ceiling. Wilted streamers in school colors, deflated balloons, and a banner that read Prom Night 1987, a night to remember. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if time had simply stopped. As he moved deeper into the gym, Nate noticed something glinting in the bleachers. Something made him pocket the camera instead of photographing it in place. He continued his exploration, but the decorations began to unnerve him. At the far end of the gym sat a small stage, probably used for school assemblies. Nate approached the stage, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the vast space. The velvet cushions weren't empty. They bore the distinct impressions of two people, as if someone had been sitting there just moments before. The temperature in the gym plummeted. Nate's breath began to fog, and he felt a presence behind him, heavy and expectant. He decided it was time to leave. 3 days later, Nate finally got around to developing the disposable camera at a local photo shop. "Interesting pictures," the man said. "Haven't seen film this old in years." Some of them came out surprisingly well. Nate waited until he got home to look through them, But as he flipped through the photos, Nate noticed something odd. The final photograph stopped him cold. It was a perfect shot of the prom king and queen thrones, professionally lit and carefully composed, except for the indentations. The same deep impressions Nate had seen in person were there in the photograph, pressed into the pristine velvet. Nate stared at the photo for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. He thought about the banner that read "A Night to Remember," and wondered if some nights are remembered because they never really end. The photo is still on his desk, though he's never shown it to anyone. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable, from the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you, or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.